when you start out, the most important thing is to decide what to focus on and just forget everything else. One day you will get to this point where you have all of these features and it works together, but you won't have that in the beginning, and you shouldn't have that as the goal. Otherwise, you will never launch.
The biggest problem building something is when no one cares about what you're building. Because if you have people who are not happy, then you know what to do to make them happy. But if you don't have anyone complaining nor being happy, you're in trouble. Welcome everyone on this new episode of Let's Talk AI. Super happy to be here today with Kevin Smith. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. So brief introduction about yourself. You'll do a better job than I will, but I see you as a founder, of course, Snipd. If you don't know about it, check it out. Podcast application, you'll share more about this. In a second, you have been more than 10 years in the AI space. For someone who know you today, what would be your 2-3 sentences introduction that you'd give at a conference, let's say?
I'll definitely tell them that I'm the founder of Snipd. Maybe just in a couple of words what Snipd is. So Snipd is an AI-powered podcast app, especially focused on people who listen to podcasts, like your audience, like people who listen to podcasts to learn, to follow their curiosity, become more knowledgeable. And we've built all of these AI features to make this more effective, more fun, and for you to get even more out of your listening. Otherwise, myself, I live in Zurich in Switzerland. I've been living here for 13 years. Originally, I grew up in Germany. I'm half English, half German, married to a Romanian wife. So it's very European influence. And I've been in the AI world now for more than 10 years. A good friend of mine back in the day, he's the culprit of all of this. He once came up to me and said, like, hey, I'm looking into this lecture. We were both still at university. It's called machine learning. Like, you should really do it. At first, I was super skeptical, like, machine learning, what the heck is that? But I spent some time, like, he sent me the PDF, the slides of the lecture, and I went through them in a weekend, and bam, I was in love. I knew, like, damn it, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Ever since then, I've been in the AI world, or like back then, machine learning, now AI, doing various things. And in the meantime, doing that as a founder.
In the meantime, this is amazing. You have an episode on the Swix and Alexio podcast, Latent Space, which I very recommend. So I'll make sure that we don't duplicate same questions so that it's more fun for you. But on this episode, there are so many topics that are interesting that I want to discuss with you. And so maybe the first one, I feel that there is an explosion in terms of founders and people building things. And when I look at Snip, I feel that you've passed levels that so many founders still are looking to pass, such as early users, early validation of the core ID, implementation, optimization of costs, operational. I believe that your team is still very small. Is that correct? Do you confirm?
Yeah, we're 4 people.
Yeah, correct. 4 people. So my first question, just to warm up a bit, maybe you can share a brief transition between the finance world, what you are doing, starting as a quant, to building a podcast app, which is very different. Also, machine learning 10 years ago and today is very different. I had a recent discussion about ML engineers and what it represents, and also the role of data scientist. A data scientist being someone who really understands deeply the models and the metrics and the optimization, and using tools to have like observability, versioning, etc., which is more like ML engineering side. What was it starting as a quant in finance, and like how did this transition happen? I know it's a broad question and we don't have to spend like 10 minutes on this, but I'd be curious to just start here as a foundation of what's coming next.
Yeah. Hey, happy to go all the way back. So I was working for the largest bank here in Switzerland at the time already. I was actually also still studying at the time. I mentioned earlier, a good friend of mine who's now one of my co-founders, he introduced me to this topic of machine learning. And for me, it was really like, once I got into it, I just realized like, man, this is so much fun. Like, there was just something inside of me that just told me, this is what I have to do. My next step was actually, even though I think it was in 1 year or 1.5 years later, I just couldn't do enough machine learning at the big bank. I actually started using it there as well, like tried to put it into everything, a bit like the, I have a hammer, so every problem is a nail kind of thing. Yeah, but it just got to a point where I realized like if I want to do this 24/7, I just have to leave. So I decided to leave. I joined an early stage tech startup here in Zurich where I built up the AI team from scratch. I could do machine learning and data science and all of that 24/7. Do it in a way that I thought was the right approach, which, back then a lot of these things were also still very new. That there wasn't
Yeah.
like the playbook. It wasn't as if like, okay, this is exactly how you do it.
One question on that point. Are we speaking like regression classification model in like Python notebooks, or like you opened a notebook and you had like a model predicting things and you were like, whoa, can you have like a mini story about that?
Yeah, I think the aspect, if I have to put my finger on it, it was like in the quant world, at least back then, it was all about these quite rigid mathematical models that were mathematically, they were super beautiful. That was nice, but it was very rigid. And there was all of this theory behind it. And there was also very little discussion about like, does this actually make sense? Like, like somebody once said this sort of makes sense. And like you have all of these assumptions, like everyone's a rational investor and you have like equilibrium markets and like you have all of these different assumptions. As a result, you have this super beautiful mathematical theory. But in the end, you have like 1 or 2, 3 parameters that you can fine tune, and that's like what you're trying to do. And I always ask myself, like, yeah, but what if we just like add more parameters? And what if we can just like test like a lot of different models instead of having all of this theory? Like, no, this is the correct one because we have this theory, and then we just see what comes out of that. Then when I just stumbled across machine learning, suddenly I realized that, oh wait, there is actually this entire field that just does that. That basically, that's what it felt like to me. Like, forget about any kind of theory. You just have the data and you have an algorithm that learns on its own what is the right theory behind it. Even if you can't put it into words and you can't describe it, like this is the equation that the data is representing. And with this, you can now predict stuff. You can actually measure how well it can predict stuff. It's not just, no, this is the correct prediction, even though we're always wrong, but it's the correct prediction because some famous economist once said that these are the assumptions, how an economy works. So I think that was like, it freed me up. It freed me up from all of this rigidity. I could just do stuff. That's what I loved.
That's amazing. A lot have changed, but I can imagine that you felt a similar way when like LLMs became like we were able to solve problems in a very real way. And also speaking of quants, like having those models that you can then test on historical data, doing things like back propagation, and then you have like all this algorithmic trading and options that must have been very interesting. And so just coming back into the timeline. So then you built an AI team from scratch. I'd love to get into the Snip journey because it has been very interesting. So ideally throughout this episode, I'd love to dig into Snip with you through screen sharing and maybe commenting on some features and technical details, but also some operational stuff. What made you move forward on building Snip and like what was the early vision about it? How did you go about, okay, then I'm going to build this app. I have a finance background. I started in quants. Now I'm building models and I'm leading a team. But now my vision is to build an app that is going to be AI-powered podcast, if I may say. So how's that?
Yeah, let's do that. I can also give a bit more details as to this transition. Like before there was the vision, like, so at the time I was working at the startup, right? That was actually also the time where I got super into podcasts, because the thing was, so I studied mathematics and this economics, like all of this quant stuff. But you would think that with that background, especially like having also studied economics, that you would know how to build a company, how to start a startup, right?
I know, right?
But the reality is like they don't teach you at all. Like basically they teach you how to become an employee at a corporate. Like that's what they teach you. And it's so crazy how, like, also when I was working at UBS, so that's the big bank in Switzerland. Basically, the connection of like my salary, like somewhere this money is coming from, right? Like I'm getting a salary. Like who is actually paying this money for which service, such that what I'm doing actually like ties somehow back to that, let's say, feedback loop, right? I mean, obviously I knew, okay, some, like how the bank was making money, but like this connection was completely, there was almost no connection. Like I had no idea like what at least for some of the projects that we were working on, like how this immediately ties back. And a startup is the exact opposite. Like it's all about, okay, there is some customer and you have to create something that they actually want, that they actually find valuable. And now that can be a lot of things, right? It can just be playful and entertainment, or it can be something very utilitarian. But it's very clear. And if that person doesn't exist, then you don't have a startup. And that's very different in a big corporate, often you have like some project, like some big manager has some idea, oh, we're going to do this. And then we spend like months coming up with some quantitative models to model this. But there was like never, like no one ever spoke to a customer, right? Before we had burned, I don't know how much time and money. This is all a long story to saying like once I got into a startup, that's really a big shock because you suddenly realize like, oh my God, like this, what you're doing is being challenged, because if you're not providing value, like you will notice it. But on the other hand, like that feedback can be very freeing because you can see, hey, we're making progress. Like this is the right thing to do, or no, this is not the right thing to do. And then you work on something else. So I really love that direct feedback, also working with customers and being entrepreneurial. I think just this energy of doing things, like solving things, being high agency, instead of just waiting until the next strategy committee meeting in like 3 months where some other people will decide what you will work on. No, you see the problem, you tackle it, you solve it, and you make progress, right? Yeah, during that time, I completely fell in love with this like a startup entrepreneurial world and spirit. But coming in, I had no idea about it. So that's why the co-founder back then, he actually recommended to me this podcast called How to Start a Startup, which was a podcast by Sam Altman back then, like long before he started OpenAI. So I think he was still CEO of Y Combinator. So the podcast basically is a lecture series that they did at Stanford. Every episode is some big entrepreneur. Like I think one episode is with Dustin Moskovitz, like the co-founder of Facebook. Another one is with Peter Thiel. I think Brian Chesky, the co-founder of Airbnb, is also in one. And I learned so much from these guys. Even though I was on the other side of the planet, I had no connection to Silicon Valley whatsoever. But I'm like getting the best advice from some of the best founders of our generation. And that was really one of the first moments when I realized, whoa, like podcast as a format is just so powerful to transmit knowledge from people. It has so much potential.
I love that.
I don't know whether that answered your question.
It definitely did. And I have some follow-up questions. So this is how you fell in love with podcasts. Since very young, I have been fascinated with YouTube and then podcasting, because to me, it has been a game changer in terms of like what's possible. Because if you're just curious, you can learn anything on YouTube with like the patience and discipline. But like if you're curious about something, there are stuff out there that are like world class and like for free. And that's such a great time to be learning and building things. And on the other side of one of the core ideas that you are sharing, it's that the entrepreneurial journey requires speed and is extremely brutal in that reality tells you if you're failing or not. Like if you have an impact and if you're valuable, you'll see it. And if you're not, you'll also see it. And so like it also becomes a game against oneself of like, how valuable can I become? At least this is how I feel about it. And so coming back to Snip, you have this love for podcasting, you have this experience at that startup, you know what building and talking to customers look like, and you got more reps and you've learned on the job, because I don't think that there are other ways to do except like being extremely curious, trying to find the answers to the right questions and trying to build the right thing and do that over and over and over and over and over again. So from when you started that journey, maybe you can share it a bit on like how did it start? What was like the MVP? What was the first version? So like if I go into Snip websites or apps today, it would feel like, okay, it's already complete. There are many things, there are many users. And I'm sure that you have a very long backlog of things that you want to do and where you want to take the company. But also often at the very start, it's just like a very small product for a very small amount of users and getting some feedback. So can you share a bit about that backstory? And I know that this question is broad, but basically it's like, how did it start it? And like, what were the first steps as an entrepreneur? And like some words that you wish you would have heard from back then when you were listening to that podcast by Sam Altman and all those amazing founders.
So for us, at Snipd, the starting point were actually two beliefs that we had that we didn't hear a lot around us at the time. One was that we looked at podcasts as the largest knowledge library in the world. And two, we said that AI would enable like a seismic shift in how we can interact with basically this knowledge library, or more generally, audio content in general. So just for a bit more context, this was before ChatGPT came out. So this was still quite early, and it wasn't as obvious as it is now that AI is changing that. So these were two beliefs that we had. And what we were trying to solve is, how can you make so much more use of this incredible knowledge library that exists, that is podcasts? That's actually what we started with. So we didn't yet know exactly what will be the first product, like what will be the power feature with which we will go out and convince people. And in general, I find that is also often very difficult to know before that. Like, also my number one recommendation for anyone who wants to build something to a startup, what we did back then is we created prototypes of various ideas that we had, and we just put them in people's hands, like our friends or people on the street. And we asked them like, hey, how do you like this? How are you using it? And through that conversation, also learned much more about their journey. Okay, why do you listen to podcasts and what is important to you? To give you an explicit example, one of the first ideas that we were working on was actually much more around discovery, like finding interesting moments within podcasts, because a lot of podcasts are long, right? It's like 1 hour, 2 hours. If you're Lex Friedman, it can go up to 10 hours. We wanted to make it easier to find interesting moments within these long episodes. It was almost a bit of a TikTok for podcasts, where we would find these small sections. So we created something like that, but then also thought, this was, again, before there were like OpenAI APIs, like ChatGPT APIs. The AI that we were working with at the time was more limited. So we thought, okay, one of the best ways of how to find the best moments was actually for our users. While you're listening to a podcast, you would save those best moments that you hear. And this is, again, a super valuable thing for if you're listening to podcasts, to learn, to follow your curiosity, right? To save the best moments, these insights for later on. It was almost a little bit more like the secondary thing. And the first thing was more like, like this discovery aspect. Let me add one more thing here. Like, our assumption was that if we come out with this, it will be easy to get everyone to listen to these amazing moments, but it will be super difficult to get users to save the moments, like to highlight moments within the podcasts. But then when we put it into people's hands, we basically saw the exact opposite. We saw that people loved listening to the full episodes. The short moments can be great for finding content, but once you really want to listen to something, then you want to listen to the full thing, if it's in audio. But they were creating all of these snips, like basically highlighting all of these amazing moments, and much more than we expected. And this was then the moment we said, oh, wait, but this is actually the feature that we should be focusing on much more. And this should be the prominent thing that we promote, that is front and center, that is the first-class citizen in our app, and not the other way around. This is a good example of this, where you just have to learn by creating a prototype, putting it into people's hands, and then seeing how they use it and iterate from that. I don't think we would have gotten to that point just by, doing the armchair quarterback thing of just thinking through that stuff.
Yeah, no, I hate the thinking through things, because I feel that our brains can just not do it. You can have a vision, but the exact operation and implementation of that vision and how like users are going to respond to things is extremely maybe impossible. I don't know. Like, you just need to see like what reality tells you. That's my view on that specific point, and you can also share your point of view. So I do like a series of brief questions just out of curiosity. Was the first version of Snip a mobile phone directly, or was it like a web app?
We were always focused on mobile. But
So like the first launch was mobile?
Yes. So the first public launch that we did, was an actual iOS and Android app. So it was real apps. Like, we did so many testing, so many iterations and prototypes before we had this official launch, right? It was just like we just tested it with people that we knew. The very, very first version that we did, that's nowhere to be seen, it was for the mobile, but it was a web version, because that was just the easiest to do very quickly. And to do it, we hijacked a Python framework, which is actually a package to build dashboards. It's not meant to do any kind of front end applications and definitely not mobile apps. It's really just a dashboard library, which that was what we knew, So that was at the very, very beginning. It was just Ferdinand and myself. So both our backgrounds are in AI, data science, backend coding. None of us had any idea about front end coding. And it was before our third co-founder joined us, who's like the front end wizard. One of the things as a founder that you have to be relentlessly resourceful. It's not like a big corporation where, I can't do that. Like, where's the department that does the front end coding? Like, no, there was no department. It was the two of us. So how can we test this? Like, you just use whatever you have, whatever works. And it was good enough to get it into people's hands and get their feedback on it. And so that was actually the first version.
The reason I love this is because I feel that so many people I can hear or talk to are just in love with what they're building, but not the value behind it. I think it connects to Peter Level's.io on X. He just used his old full stack, same languages. And I feel that we're continuously being bombarded with like new frameworks and this is the best way to do this, etc. When in reality, whatever works, while it works, and most of what we're going to build is going to be useless anyway. And so we want to minimize the time of like, is this actually useful? Do people actually care? Instead of like, okay, I'm going to spend 2 months with that framework, that specific structure, everything's so clean, zero tech debt. Yeah, but we don't have anything. I love the fact that you shared that because it was just a Python dashboard framework. So if you were to give tips to someone who have an idea of an app and it needs to be a mobile app, how would you do it today? Like, what would you not do again? And like, what would you do? And after that, I would love to go into Snipd, and maybe if you can share your screen, we can deep dive into some features and some fun questions and also about the vision of the company. But what would you do today if you were to build something from scratch and you haven't validated the idea yet? You just have like, you're excited about something, you want to build it and ship it. I love the fact that you mentioned that to everyone who you knew, I imagine that you were helping them installing Snipd on their phone, like the development version or something. But yeah, can you share more on that?
Let's just use an example. Let's use a very bad example. Let's say I would want to do a social network for pets. Like, the first thing that I would actually do is I would talk to people who have pets. So I actually wouldn't build anything. I think that's actually one of the fallacies for technical founders like myself. The thing that we love is building. That's immediately where our brain goes to. Like, in general, it's like the engineer mindset. It's like, oh, there's a problem, I'm going to solve it. But often it's more important to take a step back and ask, okay, is this actually the right problem? Is this the problem that we actually should be solving? Or is there something else? And for that, the cheapest and fastest thing is often talking to people to get a bit of an understanding. It's of course much better if you are already one of the potential users or one of the potential customers, right? So if this is something that you desperately want for yourself, then maybe you can already skip that first validation because you've already proven there's at least one person out there. And if there's at least one person, usually there are more than that, right? That was just as a side note. Also, this is something that helps us a lot with Snipd, like basically for me, like I'm just building the app that I want to have myself. And then I can take all of the feedback from the users as well. But often also just already myself, if there's something where I think like, okay, but I would never use that, that's also already a good sign of, yeah, okay, maybe this is not so important. Coming back to this example, I would talk to the people who have pets and like try to figure out, hey, imagine that there is such a thing. Like, how would you use it? Would that be interesting? Like, try to figure out what their problems are or what their desires are, right? It's not always just purely utilitarian. If you think about Instagram, right? Like no one before that would have said like, oh yeah, I have this need to post my pictures in like publicly for everyone. But you could have figured out that there is this need that people have to like show their life in an amazing way, right? Like to like in a way brag about their life as people share. Like people, like if you have something that happens to you that's amazing and you want to show it to the world, you want to show it to your friends, right? And doing that with images was just an amazing way of doing it. But okay, let's say you've done this first step of talking to people, and you believe there is something there. Today, the amazing thing is we have vibe coding, right? And we have AI coding. So depending on your skill level, you can either hop onto Cursor, to use AI to help you build it, or you even go to one of the pure vibe coding platforms like Lovable, like Replit, like Bloom, and you let the AI create a very, very basic prototype of it. In that case, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like look nice, whatever, but you have something. It's a bit like what we did back then with the dashboard framework. I mean, it looked completely crap, but it was something that you can give to people and they can use it and they understand your idea much better. Now they know, oh, okay, so this is a field where I now have to upload a picture of my dog and now I can post what he's up to. Toby just ate a snack. And I can see my neighbor's cat is there. Oh, that's so nice. Or it's like, why would I want to see that? So that helps a lot. And this is now, like, this is very different to when we started. Like, this can now be so fast. Based on that, you can start to iterate, right? And once you get to a point where you see, hey, people are having fun with this, or like you get positive feedback, etc., only then I would actually start to think about building a real version of this, which again was what we did, just on a different time frame because we didn't have vibe coding. So it took us longer to do these iterations. But at some point we also, we had all of this incoming data and feedback and our intuition that told us, hey, this is the right thing. And then we actually sat down, and I think it was within 2 months, we then actually built the first version that we then put out there. But that's a big investment, right? Like 2 months. So until you get do as many iterations and testing these vibe coding platforms, etc., before you get to this point, then commit to building something and releasing it, launching it. Yeah.
And I love it. So if I were to do Snipd on everything you just said, here are a few that I would do. The first one, talking to people. And my takeaway here is also that talking to people is the start, but like knowing what to talk about, you mentioned it. It's like no one will tell me what they want, but they can tell me about how they think and how they live and their habits and how they do things today. And so I think that becoming expert at your ideal customer profile or like your ideal user and understanding them, developing that intuition through time of like, how are they going to think and how do they use that? And like data and intuition, I think here you mentioned it at last, are pairing amazingly well together. The second thing about build and vibe coding, which I love, is that building things fast. I'm also a big fan of like, if you have technical skills today, if you have a good backend and front end setup and you're familiar with like some libraries that you enjoy, just by giving very specific ways to do things to Cloud Code or something, you can put something that is quite robust, low tech debt, maybe not very clean, but that is like already production ready. And so you don't have to like take everything spaghetti from a lovable and then try to make sense out of it. So I love that. After you validate and you get some positive feedback, you start building it and doing that investment with the piece of intuition plus data. What I would add on intuition and data is that I feel like some tech team overly relies on data and trying to get proper data. But I feel that if you have enough of the conversations with the right people, then you just combine some data to like unlock new learnings for you. But the intuition can also unlock and make you move faster. Yeah, would you add anything to my little snips that I did of like what you shared?
No, I think that was great. And I can second what you said about data. I think in general, especially if you're a startup in the beginning, even, once you've launched, once you have your first users, the amount of data that you have is still relatively small. It's so easy to think, I should be A/B testing everything. Like, look, if you can A/B test it, definitely do. But a lot of the stuff, you just don't have enough data, and it's often much better to just talk with someone. Just one example where this is like, it becomes so obvious, so immediate, is with UX testing. So if you come up with a UX design for whatever you're building, you use it yourself and everything's perfect, right? Everything works and every button is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's so intuitive for yourself, but that's because you built it. If you put that into someone else's hands and don't explain it to them, but just ask them like, hey, use this thing. You can have a huge big button in the middle of the screen that they're supposed to press. They will not find it. It is so humbling to doing these tests because you will just immediately see, like, you just have to give it to 5. Like, that's the magic number for like UX testing. Give it to 5 people. If there is a problem, you will see it immediately. You don't need to have 100,000 users testing it, and then you see, oh, version A performs 33% better than version B, and now but it's still not statistically significant. We need to let it run for 3 more weeks. No, dude. Like,
just
yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. And I like the 5-person UX rule. You have 2 steps moving forward. We can either jump into Snipd and like move around, and I can ask you some questions while you share. Or what are you most excited about the current vision of the company and like what's coming? And we can do both in any sequence, but like which one do you want to tackle first?
And let's start with the app. I think that, gives a lot of context to anyone watching. Yeah.
Let's do it. So I think you're going to share your screen. I created some snips today. My onboarding process while you're sharing was extremely smooth. I really enjoyed like all the questions, and it really guided me into setting up my account, retrieving my favorite podcasts, building snips right away. I like the fact that in the onboarding process, it shows you how to do it, so that then like you have 1 rep and you already done it. Okay, I'm seeing your screen. We're in the app. So I have a few questions, but maybe like high level.
Yeah, happy to give like the high level overview of it, and then maybe let's dive into whatever questions you have.
Let's do it.
I think most important place to start is Snipd is a fully fledged podcast player. So you can listen to all of the podcasts that you would also listen to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, for example. But we have all of these amazing AI features to help you out. Let me just go to one of the, I don't know, a recent episode, maybe from Lenny's podcast. Let's click on this podcast episode. So one of the things that we do is we create a small description of the episode with AI to give you an overview. Hey, what is this episode about? So this whole description is AI generated. You can even see who the guest is. You can also click on the guest. You get a mini bio of who the guest is. You can follow this guest. You can see other episodes that the guest has been on. Now you can, of course, play it, queue it up. You can immediately ask some questions if something is unclear, if you want some more information about something before you decide jumping in. So this is just like talking to ChatGPT. So I could ask, for example, why should I listen to this? Just as an example. Let's see what happens here. So again, you can imagine this is like chatting to ChatGPT, but ChatGPT has access to the entire podcast. So here, why you should listen to this episode. Because ChatGPT LLM traffic is already far more valuable than regular search, etc., etc. So let me go back out. Now, as you already mentioned a lot, so our app is called Snipd, and we have this concept of snips inside the application. A snip is a highlight within an episode, and here on the episode screen, you can actually discover the most interesting snips from this episode. So this is another way to explore an episode, decide, do I want to listen to the whole thing? And you can just swipe through this in a bit like this TikTok style way. For some of the podcasts, like for example, Lenny, we even have video. But let's say, hey, this is super interesting. Let me listen to the full thing. I can now dive into the episode and listen to it similarly as you would on Spotify. But now the most important feature that we have that we're most known for is, of course, the so-called snipping. So let's say I'm listening to this. I personally always listen to podcasts when I'm on my bike or when I'm doing a workout. So for example, when I'm riding my bike, I hear an amazing insight. I, of course, don't have my phone in my hand. Now, in this situation, I can just triple tap my headphones, which is the same as clicking on this big create snip button. And what it does is the AI summarizes what I just heard. So it summarizes the insight I just heard and saves this moment in my knowledge library. So here the insight is about AEO versus SEO for startups. It also extracts a quote here. This snip, I can now come back to it at any time. I can share it with friends. For example, I can also just share this video clip of the moment with a friend. I can also post about it on social media. And I can automatically sync this to my notes app. So we have a lot of users. They love note taking. They use tools like Notion. They use Obsidian. and they use Snipd to automatically sync these notes to their notes app. And beyond that, of course, we have the transcript that you can read along. Another fun little feature that our users really love is we automatically identify all of the books that get mentioned on a podcast. So this is what you can see here if I click on it. So these are all of the books that got mentioned. And we extract this with title, with the author, with a small description of the book, including the cover of the book. You can also see, let me take something here. Yeah, Thinking Fast and Slow. Like you can click on the author as well, and you can see, hey, on which other podcast was the author actually on as a guest. So here, for example, Daniel Kahneman was on the Lex Friedman podcast in 2020. So now I can just queue this up. Yeah, so these are all of the small, nice little AI features that we've built to help people who love listening to podcasts.
That's like the fact that you guys are like 4 people is mind blowing to me, because like, I don't know, when I open Snipd and I see the videos and I see everything that I have in Spotify, the first question that comes to mind is like, okay, does the content creator needs to upload it to Snipd, or does Snipd like takes it from Spotify, or like how does that work? And then when you arrive into your podcast and you start listening to it, then you have like all the transcripts. But not only that, you also like can ask anything. So you're like doing some retrievals at scale with video, with the clips, with the perfect timestamps. So it's like, yeah, I've played a lot with that. I have like some N8 ends myself where I just pass it a lot of content, and it's a rabbit hole. But not only that, you also like tag each episode, each moment, each person, you connect it. any, any thoughts on being 4 people and having like this huge content catalog and like the accuracy of it, because you don't have like many people reviewing it, fact checking, etc., etc. It's just 4 people. So like any insights or learnings, lessons learned of like, how did you manage to have so many precision and quality and features that requires a lot of extraction and context understanding and optimizing all of that, because these are expensive, especially at this scale, from like the transcription models to like all the little mini AI models that you can call when you rewrite, when you edit, etc., etc. So do you want to add some thoughts to like the complexity of these, like being 4?
Yeah. At the end of the day, there is no big secret there, I would say. It's just putting small building blocks on top of small building blocks on top of small building blocks, and doing that every day and every week, and doing that consistently and iterating and iterating. And at some point you get to this, right? I think the most important thing to remember here, like especially for anyone who wants to like start something on their own, this was not the first version that we brought out. This was also not the first version that people paid for. The very first version we talked about earlier, right, that we used with the dashboard thing, and also the first version that was a real mobile app that we launched. It was the most basic podcast player out there. The only difference was that it had a huge, big create snip button. So this we already had, but this was almost the only important differentiation to anything else. Otherwise, like everything was missing. Everything that you would get in other podcast apps. And then we just started to slowly build on top of each other, and build everything in a way that, I mean, that's one of the beauties with, we were from the very beginning AI first. So that was always the approach, right? Okay, as you mentioned, like we don't have the people to go through, I don't know, to create chapters for all podcasts. Like that's one of the features that we also do. Like here we have these AI generated chapters, for example. Obviously, we can't do that ourselves, right? So AI has to do it. Once you develop that and once it's running, it keeps running and it works. And of course, over time, you keep tweaking it and improving it. There is almost no secret sauce besides consistency and putting the small building blocks one step at a time together and continuing working at it.
Yeah. The underlying thing that I'm capturing that I think is important and not so obvious for everyone is that when you build something, make sure that you minimize the human in the loop and that you have a system that can run without you and that you can then improve. But like building features that are dependent on people can become a bottleneck. But like the crazy thing about everything that you've built is that all these systems just operate well together and like you can continuously improving like the overall big picture. I can also imagine that once you improve something, like let's say chapters, then you have like to maybe reprocess a lot of content that has like older chapters that you don't like as much.
I just wanted to add one thing there, because for me, almost the main message here is that when you start out, the most important thing is to decide what to focus on and just forget everything else. Because one day you will get to this point where you have all of these features and it works together, but you won't have that in the beginning. And if like you shouldn't have that as the goal, otherwise you will never launch. For us, it came down to basically the create snip button. Like this is what we needed. And with this, we could have differentiation and we could test that. And we saw, hey, people like that. And then we started building, and also the AI features, like the first AI features that were based on LLMs. Again, this was before ChatGPT. We were fine tuning our own open source models. The quality was crap. If you're now used to what ChatGPT is doing, it was just not that good. But it was good enough for a small set of users who had like a huge problem, like basically the most desperate people who were just dying to have this solution, right? For them, it was okay. Those are the people with whom you start with. And then you slowly start to improve it and add more features. And then it becomes more relevant for more and more people, right? Then it's not just like the 50 people who like desperately use it, even though it's like half of the time writing something that has some mistakes in the English and stuff like that. But that would be my main takeaway for the people.
I know that. And I think that it's extremely important. There is more and more common strategy right now, which is like build when the technology is not here yet, but it's going in the direction. And so like you being here when it's not really useful yet, but we know we're going to get there, has a lot of defensiveness. Let's transition directly to my last question, which is where are we heading with all of that? What are you most excited about? Or like, where do you see yourself? What are next steps? How do you see what's coming? What is your vision? What are you excited about?
Our vision has for a long time been we want to become the number one spoken audio platform for people who listen to learn. And, we've started with podcasts, but we think there's so much more audio content out there. For example, audiobooks. We already actually have the ability for our users to upload their own content, and a lot of our users are uploading their own audiobooks. But with AI, there's actually a completely new category of audio content being created right now. One very generic way of looking at it is I feel like these boundaries of is content audio, is content video, is content text, is content an image, like all of these boundaries are melting together, because with AI, you can jump from one medium to the other. So one example is any kind of blog post that you have that, some people just love listening to stuff instead of reading it. So you can transform it into audio, not just reading it out, but you can transform it into a conversation, right? I think Notebook LM is something that a lot of people have heard about, and then they've gotten to like these audio overviews. This is just one of the examples of how I believe audio content, especially in the area of following your curiosity, learning, it will explode and will get bigger and bigger and more. This area is something that I find super interesting, and we're doing various experiments. It's still too early to talk about specifics, but I can tell you that we're doing various experiments in this area. Another area that I'm super excited about is basically, again, going back to like podcasts, is this huge library of knowledge out there, but it's still a problem today of finding the best content, like coming across it, deciding what to listen to, what not to listen to. This is something that it's almost like one of the things that we started with at the very beginning, right? Like this problem still exists. And now there are many interesting aspects that are possible with AI where, again, I don't want to like say what we will do specifically because we're experimenting with a lot of things. I only want to come out once we've made the final decision. But on a high level, there's almost like an unbundling of content, right? If you want to know, hey, what's the best hiring advice of VC-backed founders out there? You can, of course, go and listen to like 10 different 2-hour-long episodes with VC-backed founders and hope that they talk about this. Or you can actually have an AI DJ that goes out there, finds these moments, and you can listen to all of the, like just this advice into one podcast as an example. This concept of an AI companion that helps you find the best content that you're interested in, gives it to you in the format that's most relevant to you. That's another area that I'm super excited about.
I love this. And my last thought on this is that I consume so much content, be it video, audio, reading, anything. And I think that there are two ways I look at it from like a learning and growth perspective. On one side, I want to like listen to full episodes because it trains my ear, my intuition, how I think about things, how people connect and express their thoughts, and people that I admire and how they're thinking and their views. And like the other situation is that I already have a skill set and I'm more in a like problem solving mode, and I need answers and I need like references and I need to reinforce an idea or maybe find counterexample. And so I think actually it's Alex Hormozy who says like you need to be remembered more than you need to be taught. Right now I'm doing monthly different substacks where I just put everything that I learned and that I consumed. Sometimes I will start listening to a podcast and I'm not that much in, but the people who are speaking have a lot of credibility. So I'll just have AI digest it for me and like put it in my end of the month summary, and I'll see like the takeaways and everything. And of course, Snip can help me do that. But like being proactive with information and knowledge and being driven like from what I want to achieve and like the things that I'm looking out for makes Snip and these kind of tools such a superpower that allows you to just grasp and understand and discover so much more content. Would you add anything to that? Or any CTA to close this episode? Are you hiring a fifth person?
Maybe. I mean, call to action, definitely try out Snipd. Actually, I'm very happy to provide you and your audience with a link to try out Snipd, to try the premium version of Snipd for free for a month. Happy to put that in the show notes, or like hand it over to you to put in the show notes. Yeah, try out Snipd. And if you like it, please reach out and let us know. And if you don't like us, please reach out and let us know.
Yeah, the biggest problem building something is when no one cares about what you're building. Because if you have people who are not happy, then you know what to do to make them happy. But if you don't have anyone complaining nor being happy, you're in trouble. Awesome. Any last words, Kevin? Any lessons take away from this episode for the Let's Guide community?
I think what I really loved about our conversation is that we spoke a lot about becoming a founder, building something, doing something. At the end of the day, that's what I would advise anyone to do at least once in their life. Just go for it and try it. I am sure you won't regret it. I think the world needs more of this kind of energy and spirit. Those are my last words.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for being part of Let's Guide podcast, and I wish you have an amazing day. Thanks again.
Thanks.